Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Dash Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Today, my guest is Chen Harel. Chen is a veteran observability expert and consultant and the former VP of products at Coralogix, and also co-founded OverOps, which was later acquired by Harness. Happy to have you on board today, Chen.
Super excited to finally record this episode.
Yeah, I think we both had a battery issue with our car, right?
For sure. Even though mine wasn't electrical, so
Oh,
it is a petrol, but the electricity just died on me. It was very brutal.
also not good. But that's a good intro to my first question, a code red moment. So what was one of your biggest code red
Uh, I,
moments in
I
your career?
I wish that was my biggest code red moment. No, but with all seriousness, so you mentioned I worked at Coralogix and OverOps, but actually my code red moment was a bit prior to that. While I was running and scaling Autodesk's flagship product AutoCAD, we were building it in Israel, the web and mobile version, and it was a huge success. It was a startup. I was one of the founding engineers. It was acquired by Autodesk. So we hit massive scale. This was early cloud days. We were running, a Java application. The clients were obviously mobile, iPads, iPhones. The backend was on AWS. Unfortunately, there was, it was pre-Git, so there's no blame. But someone had inserted a code logic that instead of logging something like an error, it added an entry to the MySQL database. And it was a Thursday night, which is the equivalent of don't ship code on Friday. On in Israel, we work Sunday to Thursday, so it was Thursday night. I get a ping from it was like a text message from our vendor for uptime saying I can't reach the APIs. I log in, and unfortunately, you kind of start to go and do your firefighting mode, and the database disk was full, 100% full, because unfortunately there was like an infinite loop, allegedly, right? At the time I didn't know, there was an infinite loop that just stored events, right? Analytical events to the database without any, consideration of circular buffer. And that was it. We had to kind of debug the issue. It took hours to, identify and then obviously resolve. Luckily, we were able to, allocate more storage, replicate the database, and move it over to a new one. And after a few hours, we got the system live, but it was very unfortunate for a few hours. Folks couldn't really log into their drawings, as you would say, in AutoCAD. And yeah, so that's kind of like my code red moment, because it was a big fuck up. The production was down for a real application with hundreds of thousands of users, which is kind of but the interesting part of it is that that's the day that we kind of sparked the idea of actually building an observability tool, because it's those nights where you're kind of saying, okay, oh, I wish I had a tool that could have just find that infinite loop potential, or find that we have a trend that the database is going to run out of steam before we react. We called it the original name for OverOps. Not many folks know it was actually preemptive software, because we wanted to build something that prevents problems in production. Again, and just to kind of, for the audience, this is around 2010. So 15 years ago, way back, when the first era of APMs were still kind of lingering. I know you took part of it in it as well.
So I can tell you, I don't know if you know how I came across OverOps the first time. It was in 2015, and I was fundraising. I was at Lightspeed, and I was talking to one of the guys who had invested in AppDynamics, John Briones, who then founded Unusual Ventures with Jyoti, the founder also of Harness, who acquired
Of course.
OverOps later. But and they wanted to invest in us, and then finally they said, "Oh, we can't invest in you because we are making this investment in OverOps in Israel,
Well, yep,
which
yep.
is kind of competitive." And I was really sad.
Yeah,
But
Lightspeed led our Series B. It was in 2016, I think, or 2015, when we had our Series B, 15 million. Now some companies are doing that as a seed round, but back then it was a big deal. For an Israeli company, regardless, to raise money in Silicon Valley was a big deal. So we were very happy. The brand was on point. I was very fortunate and very lucky to be, working and building that company. It was, I guess, one of the biggest highlights of my career.
and it also shows. I remember at the time that you got some really good people from AppDynamics. At the time, it was Steve Burton, I think, who joined. It was Randy Boysen on the
Yeah,
sales
the
side.
the, the, the first sales and go-to-market motion, Nick Durkin, he's a close friend. He's still, running field CTO he's the field CTO at Harness. So, a lot of folks came from AppD to OverOps, and then moved on to Harness with Jody to scale that even further. So, some folks have closed the circle with the acquisition. Unfortunately, I was not part of that by then, but I don't know if you want to do it like chronological or just the highlights.
I would talk about the OverOps kind of category of OverOps, how you came up with it, and then I would say there are a few tools in that where I would position OverOps is like
Yep,
a little bit similar to maybe Rookout,
yeah,
which was
yep,
a
yep, yep,
similar
yep.
tool, and also Lightrun. I think today
Yeah,
is a similar tool, right? As far as I remember,
yeah,
OverOps
yeah,
was
yeah.
also highly around getting really the details, so the variables, the data inside. It's kind of debugging information in production that you
Yeah,
get with that tool, right?
it was like the debugging epiphany, right? You would go into one of those VMs, and this is back when it was still like largely monolith, right? So there's so much multi-threading going. There's these huge context that the runtime itself and the libraries and the frameworks bring, and none of that gets to the logs, right? And many of the exceptions and many of the errors are hidden, swallowed. So there was a huge pile of use cases for mainly Java enterprise engineers, .NET engineers that would really benefit from going as deep as we could in bringing in this context back to like a SaaS experience, right? When you have like an error, we used to inject these tiny URLs into log statements so you can click and deep link into the platform to see almost like a debugging session without a running
Yeah.
debugger. Now, Rookout and Lightland that came after took it one step further, even with calling it like a dynamic debugger, where you get to choose and point like a conditional non-breaking breakpoint. That's actually a feature we used to have in the platform, but just because the nature of the JVMs at the time, the stability of dynamic instrumentations in a very ugly production environment just felt too sensitive for our customers and our kind of like ideal experience. So we actually sacked that feature, which then grew to be like a category of itself. Even Datadog today, they acquire the company, they have their own dynamic instrumentation or dynamic debugging uh, product. Yeah, I can say that I've built some of that in C++, in 2013, but we never materialized it. We never stabilized it enough to be worthy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very. I have to say, it's because we also developed agents and we looked into this. It is a really hard technical problem to solve on the agent side, right? Especially because you need to intercept an application really deeply, get a lot of data out, and that without really disrupting the production environment or adding so much overhead that it
We- you
gets
know
slow,
the
right?
the, the
Yeah.
the industry wanted the 3% max CPU or latency overhead to the
Yeah.
transactions. OverOps had amazing customers, JP Morgan Chase, Two Sigma, British Telecom out of the UK, Comcast, so like big enterprises with huge problems. But ultimately, right, this, I remember you and I met in our headquarters in San Francisco, and you kind of mentioned like the Instana play of like having, tailored engineering experiences for the different runtimes. And here I am telling you that I have like 10 ex intelligence force hackers that know all the bits and bytes of the JVM. Like we're the best at Java runtime. However, the market evolved, right, with Node and Python. If you are not polyglot, it's very hard to actually move the needle. I remember at the time we looked at Sentry as like the complete opposite, right?
Yeah.
The simplest tool, but they support everything, and they just give you something on everything. But we couldn't really pivot fast enough to give that breadth rather than depth.
No, that makes sense. And overall, I have to say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, Lytra is doing pretty well. I think they raised a large 70 million round recently, but all the other tools got acquired at some point pretty, I would say, pretty early in the, I mean, at least on a revenue scale, they never really scaled out to become a large company, I would say.
So first of all, I completely agree, and I think you and I are yet again in some capacity working in industry, right? And there's just cycles, right? Can you build like a $20-30 million company? Can you build a $200 million company? And all of us look at like a Datadog or a Splunk, and we want to be like a multi-billion-dollar company. New Relic is a decent product. Sumo Logic is a decent, somewhat product in its own category, but they couldn't really make it. So there's like just with everything, there's a pyramid in my opinion, and it's very hard to really move the needle on top, because the requirement of the technical engineer or the DevOps, the SREs, they just have a lot of demands. It's hard to execute in that space.
No, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I have to say, New Relic made a great job. I think they got to $1 billion in revenue, right? Which is awesome. And they were one of the early cloud APM vendors who really made, the first SaaS product in that space, right? So Lucerne and the team made a great job. And but you're right. I mean, both Sumo and New Relic got acquired by the same private equity fund.
So it means someone there as well, like I would say, gave up maybe on like we can beat Datadog.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how we haven't really talked about what's your take on are you in the game of like beating Datadog this time around? Like how do you think about it?
I like that question on this podcast. I mean, I have to say, absolutely, right? I mean, my goal is to, what does beat mean, right? What I tell my folks all the time is this is probably, it's hard to say, a $20 to $40 billion market, right? That's where we are. Datadog is, the leader in the space. They have an amazing product, amazing execution. I have all the respect for the team there and what they've built, but they have probably something between 10 and 20% of the market. It's not a Salesforce type of category where you own 75% of the market. And I think
for sure.
it has never been the case. And the reason for that is, as you have said, the market is changing all the time. I think there are cycles of, you can say, I sometimes say 7 years, sometimes 10 years. If you look back, Wiley in 2000, the first kind of Java agent, then New Relic, AppDynamics, Dynatrace, which, by the way, Dynatrace, one of the company, they have reinvented themselves inside of the company, I think twice already, and others don't. For us, it will take a few years to be able to compete with the Datadog on large scale deals. But at the time, I think we as a startup, we are built on top of OpenTelemetry. We are natively built around the standard. We are easy to use. We use a modern UI. I think we use AI pretty good inside of the product. So I think we have a chance to beat them over the next years. But
then I also have to say Datadog will probably at that point in time be a, I don't know, maybe $10 billion
Something different. Yeah.
company, also in security, built into really large deals, into large customers. And they will, I mean, look at Oracle, right? They do amazing. And I have already said 20 years ago that nobody needs that database anymore. And they are still around with a lot of products. So I would say beating is a hard work, right? I think
Well,
we will
we will.
we will find a place in that market to become really big. I would say it that way.
No. So first of all, I always like to acknowledge when I speak with folks about observability that Datadog, Dynatrace, the companies I work from Israel, right? There's something in European or like non-US companies in the space that's really interesting, right? Where engineering is outside of the US and innovation and finding like new strategies to bring to market is super interesting. Obviously Datadog were first with like cloud monitoring. Dynatrace has an amazing APM holistic solution. And then, companies like Coralogix that I worked for, there are even, I guess, like newer generation, Dash Zero, of course. There's Ground Cover out of Tel Aviv, more eBPF focused, that are really trying to disrupt how things were made.
Also, Grafana, by the way, Swedish, Torkel.
Of course.
So
Yeah, of
a
course.
lot of the
And
companies have European, Israeli roots. Yes.
no, for sure. And Ariel, who I know he's also a friend of yours. He always say different is better than better, right? So like as an entrepreneur or someone who's kind of like trying to fight an incumbent, always find the angle for like what you do different, because different matters. Um, you just have to convince that and obviously execute.
Especially, I talked with I mean, that's a very important thing for founders, right? It's especially true in a large market. I mean, this space is not a blue ocean market, right? There's a lot of big vendors with multi-billion-dollar revenues, right? Like we mentioned, Splunk, Dynatrace, New Relic, Datadog, Grafana. I mean, there's many, Elastic. I mean, a lot of also European roots, by the way.
Shai is a close friend, even though he was building it from Amsterdam, he's Israeli at heart.
I totally agree. You have to find your niche. You have to start in a niche, because all the vendors, also Coralogix, right? They started in logging.
Yep.
In a very special segment, and then from there you grow into an observability platform, and then probably, as you see at the moment, you then also outgrow that market, and you attempt to that by adding. I mean, you can see with Datadog, right? They added security. I just read they are acquiring
Upwind, yeah.
Israeli company for $1 billion, right? Cybersecurity company.
Amazing venture there. Great guys. I know them. No, for sure. The security play is always at heart, right? I don't remember if in Stana you had like a security play. I don't believe so, because less focused logs. But Coralogix, for years we have like a security venture called Snowbit, with managed services and features built for security. I'm pretty sure that definitely more than half of Splunk's revenue is tied to their ITSM and security. It is a big deal, right? My CISO used to say that all events are security events, right? So as long as compliance reasons, the security team, they have to store them, maybe even index all the data. So what better tool than an observability tool would be to crunch the numbers and give you insights? Who knows what Cisco is up to now, right? They just like to acquire observability tools, and I don't know if there's we'll see what happens.
It's like a collection, right? They every few years they acquire a new one.
well here in Israel, we're still kind of baffled with the whole Hexagon
Oh yeah, that was
acquisition.
amazing, right?
That was just those founders, Nitzan and Ran, were just like they just threw money at them, and then what happened? Like, I don't know. It's just. But this is me getting like old and grumpy and jealous, right? So I apologize. It's just amazing.
No, it's good. I mean, at the time, it was shortly after the Instana acquisition, and I have to say, Hexagon was less than 10% of our size, and they got the same price. They got the same price, literally. So I have to say, take my hat off that
And
they did
and
it, right?
then and they never integrated. Like we know because we helped companies migrate away from the Epsagon end of life product, but there was nothing to migrate to. Like, but just I don't know if it was a political battle. Obviously I wasn't inside.
I have some inside information I can share here, right, without naming. But what I heard is that there was really a political battle between especially the App Dynamics, the AppD guys, and they didn't want to integrate it, and so then they put it into the security team. So Epsagon was put into the security team where it made almost no sense, and then the product died. Right, I think part of it became open source, and the
Yeah,
product is just dead.
it's ridiculous. And by the way, I have some in sake of some inside information, right? I'm sure you have your own stories from the IBM acquisition. At Coralogix, we partnered with IBM on the whole cloud logs product. We always kind of waited for the Instana guys to kind of enter the room and consult. But it's so hard in these organizations, and all the like the VPs or the GMs are trying to keep their cards close to their chest. There's a reason why I do startups. Like I don't know how to play that
Yeah, I
game.
mean, I was only shortly at IBM, but I talked to the cloud team at that time. I think they used New Relic for the cloud, and we tried to position Instana, and it almost feels like an external customer, right? If it's a
Yeah.
different division, you sell like to an external customer internally, and you also, I had the feeling I have no benefits. It's the other way around. Somehow, because you are inside of the IBM, you even have a disadvantage to sell. So yes, I know that, and congrats. I mean,
It's a great partnership. It's an amazing deal for both companies, right? They wanted to, get rid of their previous vendor. They, tried to build something their own and realized this is also a bit of a big, rock to move. And they partnered with a vendor that's hungry and is willing to do the effort to be like a first citizen cloud product for them, white labeled all the way.
and talking about Coralogix, where you have been VP of product, I think one of their, as far as I see it, right, also sometimes in deals, it's really competing also on cost, right? So one of the key benefits is I by the way, at an Excel event, I talked to one of the founders of Miro,
Oh
and
yeah,
I know that you replaced Datadog there, right, with
we
Coralogix.
did, we did.
Probably a pretty big deal, and also I think there was even a Datadog person on the board of Miro, so it was not easy politically to get that replaced. But you did it, probably also because of a pricing topic, right?
I'll briefly touch on that, trying to stay within reason of what's can go on the public record. But internally, we are really focusing, and the DNA of the company is to not be cheaper. Like it's not something that we put and we try to advertise this is a cheaper product. Um, However, it is less expensive, so it's very hard to not discuss it, especially when you see that the number one pain in this space, people coming from Splunk and Datadog as the market leaders, let's give them 30% combined of the market, right? A lot of the top companies are using those tools. They want to reduce costs. The vendors, let's call it the legacy vendors, just don't have it in them to offer, a better or a different way. So what Coralogix did for years now is to just bring a different paradigm, a much simpler pricing model, and a simpler architecture to think about data, right? As opposed to a long list of SKUs and discounts and compute, that you need a PhD to even understand how to read like a Datadog usage or a bill, right? It's kind of similar to AWS to it's to some degree. It's too transparent to the fact that you just can't really grasp it without like an LLM. Coralogix just simplified it. Yes, it tends to be 50% cheaper, which is great. But I have to say that this is not the strategic play, because there will be another vendor, because Coralogix now is like 500 plus people. It's its own beast now. So there will be another company, let's just call it, dash one, uh, that will say, hey, we're 50% cheaper than Coralogix. So, why don't you do the transition again? And then, in a few years, there will be dash two that say, hey, we are 50%. Because as a startup, and this, right? You get in the beginning, you can get much more creative with how you get contracts. So, Coralogix, we were really selling the value of the paradigm shift in architecture where the customer gets to keep their data. It's not as crazy in open source, only open source like a Grafana would, because Coralogix does have some proprietary aspects to it. We do analyze the data on our end, and we pay and we do the compute, but all the storage in open formats gets to stay on customers' premise for deep analytics. For obviously, beyond Coralogix, it's very easy to migrate away. And I'm not even talking about like the whole pipeline of getting data in, which it's its own conversation. Actually, it's its own category today in the observability space of what we just call pipelines now. But Coralogix did this amazing split between compute and storage, and even then, even there, I see folks taking it even one step further, right? Companies that are saying, hey, just, put everything on your premise. We'll do like a managed cloud um, offering where we, give us a service account, we'll deploy on-prem on your premise, and we'll charge you, you'll send telemetry out. We'll charge you for the, amount of nodes that you have, the amount of data. So there's even there when, Coralogix made one step, there is a company that will make another step, and it's interesting.
No, absolutely. And you can see it. There are companies like Axiom, for example, right, who take
Yeah.
that a step further.
Simplified it. And if you think about it, one last thought on the matter, right? Coralogix started as putting some machine learning and managed elk, right? Back in the time, there was Elastic, but even the cloud Elastic was not serverless, right? You had to think about servers, you had to think about disk
Yep.
space, decide and know how to be like a DBA of sorts.
Re-indexing and stuff like
Exactly.
that.
And Coralogix and other companies in that space said, no, we want to, we will build like a SaaS multi-tenant solution on top of that, which for a few years kind of made sense. But now even Coralogix, all the companies need to be like, again, differentiated. And, Elastic was great. And they have a very interesting story with, with the vector DB portion of and LLMs. But, my eyes are on ClickHouse and how they're building and positioning themselves to be the next big thing in our space. And, because a lot of vendors are building on ClickHouse themselves acquired a company to have a coherent observability story as an offering.
HyperDX. Yeah,
Yeah.
HyperDX. Yeah.
I would definitely buy some stock on the secondary market if I had the money. I really like how these guys execute.
Absolutely. I mean, we are in regular discussions with them as we are a big user. We already, by the way, we used it in 2016 when it was still a Yandex project and open source, and most of the documentation was in Russian. And we found it because our CTO Pavlo was Russian, and we started using it. We were amazed by the scale and the speed of that database, right? And so we used it early. So we are big fans. Almost 10 years, amazing product, absolutely. And you, especially we see that there's a nice story of Shopify, how they built their own observability stack on top of ClickHouse, highly
Yeah,
scaled.
and I think also OpenAI just released some paper on their own observability stack. Like there's definitely, and this is also what I mentioned earlier about the whole, I don't know if it's private or the whole private cloud experience. By the way, Coralogix had some private cloud clients as well, where we literally installed the entire Coralogix platform. And I'm saying entire because it's a big platform. It's a big microservice architecture of Kafka streams. But newer, or I would say newer projects are essentially doing like a web app in front of like a click house, nice UI, and let's call it like production, right? It's like 3 services, very simple architecture, very easy to embed or to install on premises. So there's merit in that as well if you can get, all your checks in order.
Absolutely. And at the end, I mean, if you look at Shopify or OpenAI, I mean, OpenAI, I think recently I saw a downgrade by an analyst of Datadog because OpenAI pays Datadog $170 million a year based on that article, which is 5% of their overall revenue. And because they published this building their own observability stack, there
Yeah.
was kind of a risk of saying, okay, what if they churn and that
But they
170
will.
million
But
goes?
but
They
but
will. Actually,
but
I
they will
agree.
churn.
It's the
You know,
same with Shopify, right? Shopify, I think, paid 30 million. There's this presentation around it, 30 million a year to Datadog. And now they
it's
have 50 people building it on top of ClickHouse. And I think they said overall it costs them now 10 million.
there's an analogy I would use, right? When you and I owe the bank like $1,000, the bank is angry at you. But when someone owes like 100 million to the bank is their friend,
Yeah.
right? So like there's definitely a dynamic or like a power shift here where OpenAI now or companies that are paying, getting to like the tens of millions, that they can really call the shots, even at a company that has like a 50 billion market cap. I remember at Coralogix when we saw that some of our customers can get too big. This is where we went to the private VPC. We wanted them to be very sure that there's really no reason or no way, no realistic way that they can get it cheaper by building it themselves. Right? This was like strategically crafted. Otherwise, you're at a risk of, one of those churns to essentially kill your next round at a startup.
That's true. But I also have to say that at a certain point, it makes sense to build your own tool at the scale of OpenAI or Shopify or others, because then you can be much more opinionated. Because if you want scale and performance, then at some point you can have a multi-purpose observability tool. You have to make certain choices, right? Because these are my attributes. Then you can index differently. You can optimize the database differently, but you can't allow query for everything in every time frame, right? And if you look at Shopify, they did that, right? They made some pretty good choices and very opinionated about their stack, and then they can build something that is really scalable and super fast for them, right? So I totally see the point why you would do that at a multi-million-dollar scale.
My take there would be, which is kind of interesting, right? We see enterprises, and again, OpenAI, even though they're an enterprise in scale, they're still like very young at heart, right? We talk about those born in the cloud companies. Obviously, OpenAI is even like on a different sphere in terms of like the cutting edge technologies that they can acquire. But if you take some enterprises, we are still baffled that enterprises just have like they have all the vendors, right? They pay Splunk and Datadog and Coralogix maybe, and they don't even anticipate a consolidation play so soon, right? Like whether it's different business units or just, for different reasons, just vendors stick around. It's very hard. Again, it's hard for me to name to name drop here, but I'm sure you know it, right? Like when we have enterprises that are just paying multiple vendors, which kind of makes me think whether there's a play there as well for some, I don't know, let's call it like an AI or some consolidation that's happening from the outside, right? Rather than trying to one of the vendors to eat all the rest. Maybe one of the new companies that are doing like an AI SRE or something in that realm to just say, hey, we don't care who the vendors are. We are the tool that is going to be your next interface.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? We are also thinking about that. Also, we think it could be that one of the coding agents becomes the interface, right? You integrate your observability tool into Cursor via an MCP server. We do that, and then you could prompt and say, hey, look at the issue in -0, and then suggest me a fix in the code, right? So then you don't even have to look at the tool. So it is hard at the moment to predict how this
For
whole
sure.
thing will work.
Luckily, I'm not a VC, but like we can play the the guessing game, but things are moving at such a crazy speed. We talked a lot about startups, right? If you see what's happening in that realm with acquisitions, reverse acquisitions, the
Oh
acquihires.
yeah.
I'm reading the news and I'm like, how is this legal? All the things that's happening there is
It's not really understandable, right?
yeah.
Uh,
I'm like
uh,
I'm like, why didn't I stay in college for a few more semesters of machine learning?
yeah. Windsurf is a pretty crazy deal, right? Or uh,
Yeah,
Scale AI and whatever happened, right? That's and really large numbers. But that just shows that those companies who are acquiring, they are so big in the trillions of market cap, and AI is threatening their business model. And so the amount of
they're
money you can
gearing up.
invest, yeah, the amount of money you can invest to reduce the risk is just so high, right?
I have to say, I'm still so disappointed that the interfaces that I use daily, Siri and Alexa, are still so far behind. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy how they're just like, years now behind what you and I are doing with Cursor, for instance, or ChatGPT,
Yeah,
of course.
Cursor, or just use ChatGPT, right? I
Just
use it in my car all the time, right? Talking to ChatGPT,
yeah,
taking notes, getting some stuff.
I'm telling Siri to get ChatGPT on the phone. It's ridiculous from a user experience standpoint.
It's fun talking to someone in this space who knows the whole history and was there uh, in 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 almost more than 10 years, right?
Yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah.
since
I'm
since
I'm telling folks,
15. Yeah.
I've done engineering, product, solutions, but I'm a builder at heart. So and dev tools is like my space. Um, and yeah, I appreciate I appreciate the invite. I enjoy talking with you again, Mirko. Till next
Same
time.
here. Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by Zero. We make observability easy for every developer.